Last week we finished off the chapter 3, the 7 churches. Now we're going to have a shift in the book of Revelation. And I want to give one note, one thing that kind of makes something like Revelation hard to study, is we often approach the scriptures with it's not a worldview in this case, a framework already in place. And when we do that, well, then we're going to see everything from within that framework. Now, one we're not going to hit tonight, but we will hit, because I ran into it on a discussion board, is just the question of who are where does it say that the 144,000 are Jewish evangelists? And plugging it in, looking at all of it, that only appears if you approach the scripture with one specific framework. And so one of the things that we have to do when we study is we have to allow that our initial framework may not be the correct one. And that can be hard, especially if you've grown up in it. I'll give you an example, because for most of my life I've been around what you'd classify as the pre-trib dispensationalist framework. If you're not familiar with that, I'm going to guarantee that most of you grew up in it. And so it was a very interesting thing. Now, to understand that framework, you have to understand the basis of it. So things such as the church and Israel are completely separate entities. The church is unknown in the Old Testament, and the church is almost God's plan B. Israel rejected Jesus, so he went off and he's done a pause, and now we're in an era of grace, but a time's going to come when the period of grace is ended, the church is done, so they're going to be removed, and it's all going to be back to Israel. And the church and Israel have two completely separate plans that God has for them. That's part of the viewpoint. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, because I was in a church, not as the speaker, just as attending, and it was Communion Sunday, and the speaker that Sunday was did their teaching, I guess in this case, on connecting the Passover meal that Jesus was sharing with his disciples, as we were going to partake of it, and brought it back to the time of the Exodus, the actual Passover. He did all this, and he spent like 25, 30 minutes breaking all this down, and then goes, but that's not for us because we're the church. I'm like, wait a minute, then what are we doing? I'm like, you've got a problem now. And I knew what it was, is because he had developed a framework, and then all of a sudden, it's almost like it just suddenly clicks. Like, wait, that doesn't fit with what the framework is. So it's almost like, just forget everything I told you, now let's just enjoy communion. And I'm like, no, that you're not supposed to. You're supposed to understand. The communion is the Passover. Now what we celebrate is the true Passover found in Christ, because he's the Lamb. His blood has taken and caused the wrath, the angel of death, to pass from us. And now we have life. But he dismissed it all because, wait a minute, that means that there's a connection between the church and Israel, and he couldn't have that. And so there are cases like that. Does that mean that the frameworks are not important? No, they are. You just got to understand them. And when you come to the book of Revelation, there's really, I'll say, 3 main frameworks that will pretty much work from. There's the pre-dispensationalist or pre-tribulation dispensationalist, one I just mentioned. There's another one called classical futurism, which you'll find generally in the early church fathers. Then you'll get one that does symbolic or amillennialism, which is really found its roots in Augustine. If you're not familiar with that name, he's a church theologian that was right around the time of Constantine, 350, give or take, AD, in that time frame. And when the Roman Empire embraced the version of Christianity that they did, he saw a shift and saw, oh, this is the millennial kingdom, and therefore Revelation has become symbolic a lot. And so I mention that because that's a framework people come from. The dispensationalist hard view is that everything's literal. Now, that can be good, but it can also be taken to extreme, but it also has problems. And we're going to hit one of those actually in the first verse we look at, believe it or not. And then classical futurism is kind of in between, if you want, where Israel and the church are both one redemption plan. God still has a plan for Israel, the nation, that he's going to accomplish. Revelation is literal as much as we can, but there are clearly symbolic things in it that we have to understand. It'll become more clear later. It's just to understand when you come to something like Revelation, because it's apocalyptic literature, you cannot assume, you got to be aware of your assumptions, kind of thing. For the last 5 years, our culture's been saying, make sure you're aware of your own biases. And then they talk about things like subconscious bias and things that go to extreme. But to note your bias is an important thing, especially when you're dealing with other people, your tendency to view things a certain way. So in other words, this happens all the time, particularly when it comes to, we'll say, the age of the earth. This is one of the fascinating things, but when you try to date the age of the earth, both sides, creationism and naturalism, have the exact same evidence. It's all there before them. But when a naturalist approaches that evidence, they're coming from it with a bias that naturalism is correct. So anything that is against that is automatically incorrect, or they try to dismiss it. Creationism does kind of similar things. We come at it and we look at the evidence and we see it and we're like, oh, this is evidence for the Creator. And then when something doesn't line up, we tend to seek to try to understand it and put it in light of it. So in other words, the argument isn't over the evidence, it's over the framework in which we approach the evidence and what we look at it. And that's what we do with the book of Revelation. We just got to be aware of that. Now, when it comes to that debate, here's the problem. The naturalism versus creationism. Naturalism refuses to admit, for the most part, that they have a bias. The Christian does. The Christian's like, yeah, we're honest. We're looking at it from, there's a creator. What do we assume? We assume there's a creator who's over it, who's instrumental in it, and he can be seen through it. What's the naturalists assume? That everything has an absolute natural cause and there's no supernatural in anything. So anything that looks like potential design, well, that's just looks that way. It's not real design. And so again, bringing it back, when we look at Revelation, we're going to see things and we've got to ask, is that true? So like where in the text does it tell us that the 144,000 are 144,000 evangelism? Can we actually derive that from the text? Or is that something that we've been told for so long that we just accept and say, well, this is why? Now, again, we're not going to be dealing with that tonight. We're going to be doing some other things. So tonight, I'm going to tell you, we're only going to really look at probably 4 verses. That's it. Because we're going to have to answer a question tonight. So let's look at Revelation chapter 4, verses 1 to 4. He says, after these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, come up here, and I will show you things which must take place after this. Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne set in heaven, and one who sat on the throne. And he who sat there was like a jasper and a sardis stone in appearance. And there was a rainbow around the throne in appearance like an emerald. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and I saw on the thrones, 24 elders sitting, clothed in white robes, and they had crowns of gold on their heads. And from the throne proceeded lightning, thundering, and voices. 7 lamps of fire were burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. I said we'll deal with 4, and I read 5 just to finish this paragraph. Now, this is an interesting event because you got to remember, this all started with John. He just says, I was in prayer on the Lord's day, and he spoke to me, and he saw Jesus, he saw him walking amongst the lampstands, and then he was to record the letters to the 7 churches, which we've gone over these past 7 weeks. what you're seeing here in the start of chapter 4, when it says after these things, you're going to have to be careful, again, with your framework here. Because one of the immediately things, remember I said that one of the ways that people like to understand those 7 churches is try to say there's 7 church ages. Now, why is that important here? Well, because, these are the 7 church ages played out. And then John says, and after these things, so this is after those 7 church ages. Now, how do you derive that? Well, you're coming at it with a certain framework. Now, throughout this time, I've already said, it's like, although there is some kind of historical evidence, if you try to line up the church with the church ages, it doesn't quite work. And it's better to understand 7 real churches were chosen because they're representative of all churches. And even churches today will fall into one of those categories of either what they're challenged with or where their strengths are. And so when John says after this, don't think, this is a chronological time. And I'm going to tell you, the book of Revelation, it gets very difficult to figure out chronology here. Because sometimes it's things that are after one another, and sometimes they're things that are concurrent with each other. Sometimes it's something happens, and then he goes back and he deals with something. Particularly if you look, you've got a big interlude. You got the seals, then you got the trumpets, then you've got the bowls, and then after the bowls, which are supposed to be the end, then you get this whole story about Mystery Babylon thrown in there. And unless you think that after all the judgments have come, then all of a sudden there's a Mystery Babylon that is going to be judged and punished. Well, no, that must have been something that's happening all this time. Plus, you also have the instance in later Revelation, you get talked about the 2 witnesses. All of a sudden, they're kind of thrown in, and they're given how long their ministry is. Then you got to figure out, well, when was that? Is that at the start? They start, and then they're killed halfway through? Are they halfway through and then killed at the end? Or are they somewhere in the middle of all that? And so chronology can kind of be rough to kind of grasp. And so when John says after these things, in this case, and in most times it comes up, it usually just means with that section being shown complete, it's now time to take a look at something else. And most of it is not going to just be chronological. It's time for something else. So John's literally saying, after I was given the message to the churches, well then, this is now what I saw. This is what takes place. And this is now the crux of what we're going to talk about. And he says, and I looked, and behold, a door standing and open in heaven, and the voice which spoke, I heard speaking like thunder, said to me. This is the same one from the beginning. That takes you right back to the beginning. It's the same voice speaking. The one that addressed him the first time on the Lord's day addresses him again. And what is he told? Come up here, and I will show you the things which must take place. Now, I'll confess that throughout the years, one of the people I like to watch on Sunday evening, as most churches didn't have Sunday evenings, I guess I used to like to watch Jack Van Impe, just because I found it fascinating, and he always had he had newspaper articles from everywhere. He must have a team that just sought every single newspaper on earth. But one of the things that was fascinating is he would always use, and he'd always quote, come up here, as if that was reminiscent of the rapture. And when you look at this verse, how do you derive that? And if you go, well, but hold on, I want you to understand. This is where I said you got to challenge your framework. Does this verse say anything about the rapture? It doesn't. The only way you can derive that is if all of a sudden you've got to make John representative of the entire church, and John's going up is the representative of the church going up. But how do you arrive at that? Well, those are 7 church ages. The church's ages are now up, so the church is raptured, and John's representing the rapture. Now that sounds feasible as long as you already start with the framework of pre-trib dispensationalism. Now, I'm not saying one's right, one's wrong. I'm just saying, do you see how your framework already comes into play the way you understand it? And so a lot of times when I approach the scriptures, I do my best not to impose what I already think. And so even as I'm going to be teaching you through this, I'm just going to teach straight what the text is. And I'll probably tell you what each position deals with that. And the purpose is twofold. One, I want you to be a little more varied in your understanding. And two, so that you grow and you can understand your position. It's kind of like an old joke that I heard. A young girl was watching her mother prepare Christmas dinner and the Christmas ham. And she noticed as her mother prepared the Christmas ham that she cut off the ends of both of it before she put it in the pan. And she asked her mother, "Mom, why did you cut off the ends?" And the mother says, "Well, actually, I'm not really sure. It's just always something my mother taught me." It's okay. So the little girl went and she found her grandmother. I said, "Grandma, Mom says you always cut the end off your ham before you put it in the pan." She's like, "Yes, I do." It's like, "Oh, can I just ask, why did you do that?" And the grandma thought, it's like, "You know what? I really don't know. My mother taught it to me." Now this girl was fortunate. Her great-grandmother was still alive, so she went and asked, "Great-Grammy, why did you cut off the ends of your ham before you put it in the pan?" She goes, "Oh, that's simple. Yeah, that's how big the pan was." And they just continued it on without understanding why. And so part of understanding why do we think such ways, why do we hold such ways, is you've got to understand the strengths, the weaknesses, and the whys. And that's part of what I want you to learn. And so if it feels like I'm attacking something that you've learned in the past, don't feel I am, unless, of course, you hold to amillennialism, and then, yes, I will attack it. Or preterism, I will attack that as well. Just because I find it inconsistent, even within their own standards, kind of thing. They're not consistent in their understanding. And so it's just so you can develop the idea and the framework of why things happen. So John here, when it says come up here, and like I said, when it came to Jack Van Impe, I noticed he always stopped there, but the phrase doesn't stop there. The phrase is come up here and I will show you things which must take place after this. Now that also helps us set what is going to come. Because what does this tell us about everything that is going to be written now in the book of Revelation? It is things to come. And that's important too. Now, the preterist, I am going to attack them here a little bit, they like to date the book of Revelation to 60 AD, in the 60s, the time of Emperor Nero. And the reason they want that is because they'll hold that it's prophecy, but, this was all fulfilled during the time of Emperor Nero. And they'll try to make cases for it. And their biggest argument is the fact that there are things in the book of Revelation which talk about the temple. Like he'll go in, he'll cause a sacrifice to end, he'll defile the temple and all that. And so what are they automatically assuming? And the same thing that we all do. The temple must be standing. No problem there. But when they looked in their day and age, remember preterism really kind of took off in its modern form around the 1500s. What wasn't there? There's no temple. What also wasn't there? No Israel. And remember, Israel came in age again in 1948. Add a couple hundred years there. And so that makes a big difference. So they're like, that's argument for this. But all of a sudden, a nation was born in a day, and even you look at Israel today, you can research called the Temple Institute. And they're ready at a moment's notice to construct, to build, and to resume. And so is it beyond belief that now there could be another temple built very quickly? No, not really. And so it lines up. But they're approaching it with that framework. That's what they want. But John wrote, by all the evidence, in the 90s. And during that aspect, if John wrote in the 90s, then everything is yet to take place. That takes out Emperor Nero. That removes Emperor Titus, who destroyed the temple in 70 AD. And it means it's yet to take place. And since these are going to be shown these things, and our interpretive framework here is not symbolism. So it's not amillennialism, it's not preterism, it's the literary, where we look at either dispensationalism or classic futurism, where all these things are yet to take place. And so as we study it, I'm telling you right now, I'm coming from the framework of literal as much as possible. There's no reason to doubt it in that case, unless it says, and there was like obviously I don't believe that the Antichrist is going to be a dragon. And I don't believe that the false prophet is literally going to be a lamb that comes up and speaks with a guttural dragon's voice. Obviously, those are symbolic to represent what they're going to be like. So there's those things, kind of thing. And so, but I'll hold it, these are the future things. So John is taken here, and he says, at first voice, come up here, and I will show you things which much take place. And John says, immediately as I was in the Spirit. That's a little different, because if you look at what Paul says in his letter, he says, I knew a man who went up to the third heaven. And then he says, whether in the spirit or in the body, I am not sure. Now, most likely Paul was referring to himself. But here John makes it clear, I was in the Spirit. Kind of a different thing. Now, it also kind of makes it wonder, how long was this experience to John? Was it immediate from earthly perspective, yet happened in heaven, outside time? Don't know. It's one of those fascinating things you can get into if you just like thinking that way. But so in the Spirit, and where did he go? And behold, a throne set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. Where did John go? Right into the throne room of God. He didn't just go like, oh, I was brought in heaven and saw fluffy white clouds with people around and harps, and gone to Christmas Town and saw a big Christmas town and body part. I'm making fun of somebody else, just so you know. Yeah, it's Cat Kerr. No, he was taken right in the throne. It's fascinating because most of the accounts that we have of somebody, if you want, who sees into the heavenly realm, where are they always ending up? God's throne room. When Isaiah went, where was he? His throne room. Where was Ezekiel? Throne. They didn't go anywhere else. They were immediately right there in God's throne room. And what's interesting here is you would think that if John saw God the Father, what would he want to describe? Yeah, I'd want to try to describe God in some way. But he doesn't. Not really. Think about it. Just compare that to the description of Jesus earlier. His hair is like wool, his eyes like fire, his feet like bronze, and all that. But here's like he who sat there he was like jasper, sardis stone in appearance. That's it. So that's all I got. Just, what is he looking at? He's just looking at the radiance that's coming off him. The glory that's coming off him. He's like, that's all he could talk about. And so that's his whole description. And then the only other thing he talks about, and then around his throne, there was a rainbow. A rainbow on the throne, and in appearance like an emerald. That's all he describes. Now, John goes on to describe more of the throne room, but I want to visit some of the others here. I want to take a moment. Let's go visit Isaiah. And the reason being, and that I like to visit these, is because some of the things that John describes here, because he's going to describe the four living creatures and thrones and all this, it seems fantastical. It seems like, if you want, mythological, somebody making it up kind of thing. And so you say, oh, it's all just symbolic, but John's not the only one who's seen this. Let's look at Isaiah chapter 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up. The train of his robe filled the temple. Notice again that he doesn't actually describe God. He just says, what's he looking at? He's like, the clothes, the robe, the majesty. He says, and it stood, above it stood seraphim. Each had with 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face. With 2 he covered his feet. With 2 he flew. And one cried to the other and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. So he was brought right in. And if you look, his whole description is just what? Majesty, worship. There's these 4 living creatures. And all the thing he says is they've got faces, they got 6 feet, and they praise. So Isaiah's view is nothing more than just God on the throne, and he can see the 4 living creatures. It's kind of like one of the things that when I go walking, because of the way the time changes now, it's usually pretty dark when I go walking. And I detest it when a car comes and they have high beams on, because I can't see a thing. Only thing I can see, beams. Yeah, headlights. And the closer it gets, the less I see. And so it's no wonder that what is Isaiah seeing? He's before the throne of God. He sees God's majesty, and the only thing he can see are what's right around the throne. That's it. He sees the 4 living creatures. Let's go look at Ezekiel a little bit. He gets a little different description. Well, let's pick it. I'm just going to pick up in verse 4, Ezekiel chapter 1. He says, Then I looked, and behold, a whirlwind was coming out of the north, a great cloud, and with raging fire engulfing itself, and brightness was all around it, and radiating out of its midst like the color of amber out of the midst of the fire. Also from within it came the likeness of 4 living creatures. And this one was the appearance. They had the likeness of a man. Each one had 4 faces, and each one had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and their soles of their feet were like the soles of calves' feet. They sparkled like the color of burnished bronze. The hands of a man were under the wings of on their 4 sides, and each had 4 faces and wings. Their wings touched one another. The creatures did not turn when they went, but each one went straight forward. As for the likeness of the faces, each had the face of a man. Each of the 4 had the face of a lion. On the right side, each had the 4 had the face of an ox, and on the left side, and each of the 4 had the faces of an eagle. Thus were the faces. Their wings were stretched upward. 2 wings on each one touched one another, and 2 covered their bodies. And each one went straight forward. They went wherever the Spirit wanted to go, and they did not turn when they went. John's focus is more on the 4 living creatures. Now, Isaiah didn't focus so much on them. What's Isaiah focusing on? The worship. Makes sense. He's a priest. Ezekiel here, he gets we'll say, Isaiah was brought and saw the Lord. John was brought into the throne room. Ezekiel, it's the idea that God came to him. He brought it to him. So Ezekiel's getting a distance look at the creatures. And so he describes them as wings. 2 they flew, 2 they're covering their bodies. They've got 4 faces. He's got a description. Now I'm going to jump ahead to John's a little bit. We didn't read this farther, but let's go back to Revelation because John gives a little description. Me on 2 pages. Before the throne there was a sea of glass like crystal in the midst of the throne, and around the throne were 4 living creatures. Notice that Isaiah, Ezekiel, and John all say there are 4. That's kind of strange that all of them would choose the exact same number if they were making it up. Then it says, the first living creature was like a lion, the second living creature like a calf, the third creature had face like a man, the fourth flying like an eagle. There were the four living creatures, each having 6 wings, were full of eyes around and within, and they do not rest day or night, saying, Holy, 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 the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. They're the same creatures. Ezekiel just got to see them a different way than Isaiah and John did. And John sees one side of them, basically, so he sees one face. Ezekiel got to see all 4 sides. Ezekiel got like a 360 around them kind of thing. And my point is, this sounds fantastical, but you've got more than one person attesting to it. And so when John says, this is what I'm seeing in the throne room, there's no reason not to accept that's exactly what it's like. That he says, I come in, I see him sitting on the throne. Isaiah says, I come in, I see him sitting on the throne. Ezekiel says, I see him and he's on a throne. They each describe the same thing. Some focus on one or the other, but it's there. They all say, what do they see around the throne? 4 living creatures. What are they doing? They're flying around, they're worshiping. Isaiah says, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. What does John see? Holy, 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 the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. This is what the throne room of God looks like. And so it's one of those things that when you run into, and the reason that's so important is because what we run into is there was a fad about 8 years ago, which is what you can call the heavenly tourism fad. Now, I make fun of Kat Kerr because she's just nuts. I got no other way to say that. She's nuts. But you got others who claim, oh yeah, they were in God's throne room. What do you got, like 90 minutes in heaven? You got the boy who went to heaven and back. And you've got all these fantastical ones. And they're describing what they see. Yet why is it so different from these accounts? Why is it so different from the biblical accounts? Now, people flock to them because why? Yeah, we're fascinated by heaven. And as a Christian, we should be. Why? Because we're yearning for the home that we've never been to. But we shouldn't allow that to take us to something that we should never be in. John just describes, he's seated on the throne. Because of the glory, he doesn't see the train of the robe. He's just focused on the majesty. And what John sees is something that Isaiah didn't see, because Isaiah's got himself focused. He sees all the thrones. And so John, he's looking at this, and he says, around the throne, he says, I see 24 other thrones, and on the thrones I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white robes. They had crowns, gold on their heads. Now, this is where we run into a question. Who are these people? He's just seeing the throne. You got 24 elders sitting on 24 thrones. Who are they? What are they doing? Why are they there? They're fair questions. And it's important to kind of deal with this. I'll give you the classical answers from each of the sections. The amillennialist says it's not important. They're just a symbolic number of representing people, representing Christians, if you want. The classical futurism says, well, most likely 24 is a literal number, and it's broken in 2 sets of 12. 12 representing the 12 patriarchs, and the other 12 representing the 12 apostles, representing everybody in Christ as a whole. Then you've got those who are dogmatic about it, which are, well, these are the 12 patriarchs and the 12 apostles. There's one major problem with that. Who's seeing it? One of the apostles. That'd be kind of odd. You're telling me when you go, hey, there's 24 thrones, and
I recognize that guy.
Hey, that's me. Hey, wait a minute, there's Peter. There's John. There's James. There's I can name them all. Hey guys, how you doing? Why? Because he's the last one left. So why would his throne be occupied? Seat filler? Yeah, it's the Oscars. Somebody just be a seat filler. The answer is not to be dogmatic about this. So there's that there are 24 people who represent the church. And how do they derive that? Or the believers? Well, it's like, what are they wearing? White robes, crowns. And what are believers promised? We're given white robes and crowns. Now, this makes it perfectly plausible. But there is a question we can ask about that. Are we sure that only believers will have white robes and crowns in God's kingdom? There is that kind of question we can ask. Now, there's also another thing about this. Maybe this is the heavenly council. The book of Kings gives an event. He says that there's a council, and God calls the council together and says, okay, who's going to go convince Ahab to his death? And they present. And then there's times where the angels are brought before God and present. And it seems that God kind of has a council. Not that God's not supreme, but he just has people there. It's perfectly possible as well. So the short answer is, we don't know. But the question is, are you happy with that? Because a lot of times we want to be dogmatic. We're like, I want an answer for this. Now, the most accepted answer is, although we may not know exactly who the 24 elders are here, it seems that they can easily represent humanity, the redeemed in this case. A couple of the examples is why. I'm just going to jump ahead here a little bit. If you look in chapter 4, it's given the description here, so I'm going to start in verse 10 so you understand who's talking. Verse 11, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him, who lives forever and ever, and cast their crowns before the throne, saying, you are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. Sorry. Yeah, it should be it, isn't it? No. Yeah, that's what they're doing. So, yeah, that's fine. For you created all things, and by your will. So what do we see? First, their act is worship. It was just confusing with another section. And so they're worshiping, but there's the song of the Lamb. Okay, so yeah. And so look, and then jump over into chapter 5. I was thinking ahead of myself at the time. So again, so the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each having a harp and a golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. That's verse 8 of chapter 5. It says, and they sang a new song. Who's singing? The elders. Okay, it's important. You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain and have redeemed us to God by your blood. Wait a minute, the angels haven't been redeemed. Humanity has. Now, you say, well, that's pretty conclusive. Except, not all ancient manuscripts have the word us there. Only a few do. So then we run into the question, it's not going to change the statement, but it changes the assurity of that statement. Oh, they're definitely believers. Why? Because you redeemed us. But some of the manuscripts just say, and you have redeemed. You have redeemed them or redeemed our. So it's almost blank in places. And so it's one of those questions. Again, it doesn't really matter in each end. Is I want you to develop why you think each case. And as I said, if you hold that, we're not entirely sure, but it seems best that they represent believers of all time that have been redeemed by Christ, I will tell you, you're in good company. You are. Whether they're the 12 patriarchs and the 12 apostles, they would still, what would they do? They would represent the redeemed. If you hold that these are believers who are there, they represent the redeemed. And both of them are perfectly fine. And I will tend, even in my own, I would tend to go towards that aspect than more than any others. And the other is, like I said, that perhaps they are a class of ruling angels that God has given some authority. And that's not unheard of, especially if you look at Daniel. If you remember, it talks about the fact that Daniel had prayed, Daniel 10, he said, I was held up by the prince of Persia. Kind of strange. So it seems that there is some kind of classification in angelic realms as well, because I know it's a bit of an assumption there. If there's a classification in the demonic realm, then there probably is in angels. Because we are aware that angels seem to have some classifications. You've got living creatures, like you see the 4. You've got cherubim. You've got who, for best we understand, are angels that defend God's glory, if you want, and carry out certain missions. Think of the Archangel Michael. Then you've got seraphim who seem to worship and deliver God's messages. Think of Gabriel. That's kind of what his job is. Doesn't mean they look different, just means Michael's one class and Gabriel's the other. And so it's possible in the angelic realm that these are just part of the ruling class. They oversee and they worship and they celebrate as well. It's whatever in this case, it's not whatever you want, but if you stay within those two, you're probably pretty good. And so I'm not going to burden you down anymore tonight on that. It's just to show you that when you come to the text, when you study it and you read something, oh, that's great. It's like, let me ask why. Why do I hold that? Why do I think that this is true? And can I back that up? Can I back up what's being said, or am I inferring that's what the text means without any backup? Because that's just what I've been taught. And so with that, I guess that's kind of where I'll stop. I don't have any big, smart concluding remarks tonight, but that's about where I'll stop for this evening. So, yeah.